Hi, Andy Miller. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Hello, Jason. Hi.
Great to have you on the show. We're talking to Andy today, who is a retired psychologist, award-winning poet, written a number of novels. So you've got quite a varied background. Also, you're into rock climbing, cycling. So there's many strands to Andy's bow. But we're talking to him specifically today about his new novel, Never a Word, set in both Weymouth from a historical perspective and Portsmouth. And Andy's going to be telling us about his new book. So can you introduce just the book to the viewers, please, Andy, in first instance?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Jason. I don't need to wave it about because you've got it mounted nicely behind you there. But a quick way in might be for me to just read the back cover blurb, because I think that gives an outline of what the thing's about, and then we can talk about various bits of that. Okay, so this is the content of the back cover. In 1927, on a beautiful stretch of the Dorset coast, a mother of 3 walks into the sea and drowns. 55 years later, Sue Roberts hears about the manner of her grandmother's death for the first time. As she delicately prizes further information from her unstable mother, Sue learns that her kind-hearted father has forbidden all discussion of the tragedy. He has never even allowed his mother's name to be known. But never is a word Sue cannot accept. How and why have her parents kept this shocking secret from her? What has blunted her curiosity so effectively and for so long? Will Sue's life and family break apart as she seeks the truth?
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
And the nature of this book is it's more fiction based, because obviously we serialized your previous book from 2015, The Naples of England, and
yeah, you did.
It was much more of a memoir, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
It talked about briefly, well, not talked about briefly, it talked about you growing up. Can you just very, very briefly just summarize the Naples of England for us, and then we'll obviously make
I can. Yeah, here we go. Thank you again for serializing. I appreciated that very much. The Naples of England was a memoir, just very lightly fictionalized in places. Names and places were changed, and perhaps 1 or 2 flourishes put in just for a little bit of extra effect. It did describe growing up. I was born in Weymouth just after the Second World War, and I wrote a series of vignettes that went through from about 1950 to the mid-1960s, and I thought I was covering just topics that I found interesting. Some of them were supposed to be funny, humorous, and some of them were quite poignant, and some of them were very much of the time. I didn't think I had a conscious plan about writing it, but when I look back on it, I think I was trying to describe a period which to a child seemed like a secure period. The 1950s are always talked about as being dull and boring, but they may also have felt safe, I think, for people like me. I was also describing a place that felt safe. I think Weymouth and Portland, that the visual arrangement on the map fascinated me as a kid. I thought, who could live in a more interesting place than this? West Bay curving in one side, Weymouth Bay curving in the other side. Well, I didn't know much about symbolism as a kid, but I could feel the kind of warmth and security of Weymouth Bay as a place where, I played on the sands as a kid a lot. And then I could feel the wild, raging terror of West Bay and thought, well, these are 2 sides to the human psyche, really. I didn't think in those terms, but the contrast was so dramatic, really. And then that ring of hills at Ridgeway, which kind of was a northern boundary, really. I don't think I went anywhere much as a kid. I think when I reflected on it, I thought before I took up hitchhiking at about 17, I think I'd probably been outside that triangle north of the Ridgeway about a dozen times in my first 16 years. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a car. So, but we also didn't have a great incentive to go anywhere else. It just felt complete, really. I mean, by the time I was 17, I couldn't wait to get in the big city. So I think I was describing various vignettes of good times, but also, terrible times, fear, but a secure, a contained world, really, both physically on that map and also, if you like, psychologically and socially. It felt like a stable community. And then, as you know, in the last two chapters, I zoomed forward to a revelation that just came from my mum quite by chance, really, and washing up on a Boxing Day in the 1980s, when I learned that my dad's mother had killed herself, had walked into the sea somewhere in Dorset. And I finished the book there, trying to contrast this sort of sense of a secure, predictable world through the 1950s and 60s with this shock that actually had been anything but, really. But as a kid, I had no sense of it at all. So I just thought I'd leave that hanging, really. And interesting, a lot of people since have read it and said, well, you know, I found out something about my family, or we had a suicide, or I never knew until I was in my 30s. So what I thought was a kind of shocking and rare event for me has proved to be much less so, really, as more people have talked to me. And so that was that book. And the point of the novel was to say, well, what if you start from that place at the end? And what if you use that situation about somebody finding out in their 30s about a suicide, and then wondering, you know, as I said in the blurb here, wondering how they could have been so blind to it, and how that knowledge was just swept away and stayed swept away. So I used that as a starting point then for a novel, and that's Never a Word.
And it could easily be, for people finding out such a revelation, it could easily be a sort of Pandora's jar, couldn't it? It could expose them to a whole number of things that perhaps, looking back retrospectively in the future, they would say, I didn't really want to know that. Exactly,
yes. Yeah, once it's out the box, you know, you can't get it back in again.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that
sorry.
No, you go forward, please.
I gave my character, Sue. Sue, like me, was born at the end of the Second World War, and she's had, I mean, you know, there's some of me in Sue, but there's also some creation and some other people I've known, women I've known. But I've given her the task of dealing with all those issues coming out of Pandora's box.
Yes, and she's obviously the central character here, isn't she? She welds it all together. She's on the one hand, she's got the parents, and obviously the revelation that comes many years later that her grandmother had to see, and the fact, as you said earlier, that the father wanted to keep it quiet. He didn't want to talk about it. She's also got her relationship with her sister.
Yeah.
And also she's got the historical, hasn't she? Because she starts to explore her grandmother's life up until that fateful day.
That's right.
You've got the history, I guess, sort of based more in Weymouth, then you've got the transition to Portsmouth, and you've got the two things ever colliding.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Sue is the major character in the book, but an equally major character is her grandmother, Letitia. And the book, if you like, has two life stories going on which develop. One is Letitia. We don't know that she's the grandmother at first, but it's written so that it's fairly obvious that it is her. So we have Letitia's story going through to her fateful day, and then we have Sue's story going back as she investigates. And in between these two main characters, there are Sue's parents, her father being Letitia's son. And what I quite like to do as a challenge, really, in terms of the structuring of the book, was to tell the story about Sue's parents' relationship, but indirectly, rather than them being the main characters. We see quite a lot about their life through Letitia's story and through Sue's story.
Right.
So we're dealing with three generations, really, but the middle generation's in the sandwich.
Yes, and that's obviously where Sue realizes that her mum and dad aren't quite what she thought they were.
Exactly, yes. She has a major moral dilemma, Sue, which is she comes to realize how hurt her father must have been as a child, losing his mother in that tragic way. And how, you know, he had every right to try to cope, and the family had every right to cope as best they could. And banning mention was their way of coping. But then Sue has the dilemma of saying, well, she just cannot live with this woman being obliterated from history. You know, she feels she must reintroduce her into history. And she realizes at one stage, when a photograph finally emerges of her grandmother, that she looks like the grandmother. She remembers that, she compares Sue's own primary school photograph with the photograph of her young grandmother, and realizes that they look similar. They share bone and tissue and blood, and she cannot let this woman just be disappeared from history. So she has to find out more about her. But she knows that the finding out is potentially incredibly hurtful to her father, who she doesn't want to hurt, whose hurt she recognizes. So the book is about the moral dilemma that Sue has in struggling with these two competing forces.
I read a review online in which one of the people who read the book, they said that it's not only about reading a novel of fiction, it's about using the opportunity to reflect on your own life experience as well, in terms of, what secrets if your parents or if your grandparents or siblings or etc., what secrets have they hidden that are significantly dramatic? And it is interesting, isn't it? Because it does make you to start to question the nature of reality of people around you. When, like you said at the very beginning, on Boxing Day, your mum revealed to you something that you hadn't known before, and then whack.
Yes.
Whack. And exactly. And then it then leads you to write a book based on the fact that you'll never lose that moment. You'll never forget, will you, that Boxing Day, that moment when it happened.
No. I had the book, really. Yeah. I mean, I'm delighted. The book's only been out, it was less than a couple of months, but there've been some early readers and a few reviews on Amazon, as you mentioned. I'm just delighted that people have said the book's made them think, because of a book somebody said to me once that particularly about novels, that what they value, what characterized a good novel for them was the fact that they were almost grieving when it was finished, that they'd lost something and they were missing it. And, there have been a few books I've read that have had that effect on me, that my life feels like something important's gone just because I've read the last page. Well, I wouldn't be so bumptious as to say that's what my book's doing. But if it's had that kind of a bit of that effect for some people, well, I'll be absolutely delighted. I feel I've shared something, really. And
especially coming intellectually from a point of view where you're a psychologist.
I'm only a psychologist in the day job, but I'm an ordinary human being at other times. But I've looked at it from both sides.
And especially educational psychology, because you're dealing with young people and
family.
And in this instance, you're dealing with Sue, who is a young person.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. I mean, secrets in families is a massive topic, but for psychologists, and it's interesting, kind of people working in with family therapy approaches. One of the areas, if there's a family in trouble, either because the whole family feels they're in trouble, or often because the family feels one of the members is a problem, but actually you've probably got a systemic issue going on as well. One of the approaches that psychologists, therapists will take is to look for the secrets. What are the secrets in this family? We've probably all got them. And then what are the rules, the implicit rules about the secrets? Who's allowed to know the secret? Who's not allowed to know the secret? Who's allowed to tell somebody else about it? Who's not allowed to tell a certain person about it? All these implicit rules that never stated, but you get the feel of them in a family, and you certainly know about it if you transgress, either deliberately or accidentally. So secrets are a massive feature of all families, really, but not all of them are kind of tragic and big, but they're all there, really, around birth, sex, death, and probably money. They're all families have got them. So I was interested in that aspect from a slightly more theoretical view. But
I mean, I found out at a relatively early age that my great grandfather in 1918 had taken his own life, quite violently, because he couldn't cope anymore because his wife, my grandmother's mother, had died during childbirth in 1909,
Right.
and
Right.
those 9 years, I think he must have just hung on, because in the end he just, 1918, he slashed his throat and his wrist and took his own
Yep.
life. And my grandmother found him,
Yep.
which is obviously, she was only 13 at the time. But she was open about it. She told me about it because we had a close relationship. But yeah, absolutely. As soon as you find out something like that, it never goes. I think even if you start to get probably some sort of, you know, dementia or Alzheimer's, it's probably still one of those memories that will stay with you till the end.
And in fact, if you get something like dementia or some sort, it may actually lower the boundary, the barriers which stop you expressing it. So you might actually find it coming out, maybe in strange ways, but you may find that it's finally a chance to release that stuff. One of the themes that's in the novel is the burden that Sue's mother has carried of knowing this information, but it being a tightly guarded secret that she's never supposed to talk about. So she has to carry that trauma for her husband, and of course that doesn't do good things for her either. So the book doesn't make judgments, or I hope it doesn't make judgments. It just talks about the terrible dilemmas that people get ensnared in, really, by virtue of a tragedy.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Andy, because I can't wait to come into contact with lots of people who read your book, especially locally in the Weymouth and Portmouth area, etc., and to be able to engage with them in talking about how it affected them and how they perceived it, especially those people who've lived here for a long time, and also their parents, grandparents, etc., maybe have come from the local area. But yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on the show, 10 by 6. We'll have you on again really, really soon. One thing I just want to ask you: how can readers, how can viewers of the program, how can they access your book?
Okay, well, it's there on Amazon. Never a Word, Andy Christopher Miller, as shown on the screen behind you. I know some people don't like Amazon, and I fully understand the reasons why. So they can also get a copy directly from me. If they email me at Andy Christopher Miller, all one word, all lowercase, at gmail.com. So Andy Christopher Miller, as behind you, but all one word and lowercase, at gmail.com. I can then send them details about bank transfer, and they can send me an address.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put that onto the video when it's published.
Okay.
So I'll put the contact. I'll put both the Amazon link and your email address, if that's okay.
Yep.
And then people can choose whichever direction they would like to go.
Fabulous.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jason. I really appreciate it. It's been nice talking to you, and it's been lovely for me to be able to. I think we've exceeded the 10 minutes, don't you?
Don't worry about that. It's absolutely our pleasure. Thank you so much, Andy. Speak soon.
Nice to talk. Yeah. See you. Bye-bye.